So welcome to our another edition of our podcast, Opening Up in Lockdown. And I'm really excited to our guest this evening is Paul Singh, who is, he's quite hard to define really. He's a filmmaker, an activist, producer, a curator of other people's work. And basically, I think he's an artist who goes and asks questions that a lot of artists don't or are afraid to ask at this time. So I'm really looking forward to have a conversation. Welcome, Paul, to our podcast. And
Hi, Patrick.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, we start off really just, I would love to hear, tell us a bit about yourself perhaps. And it's always interesting for our guests to find out was it a catalyst for you becoming a filmmaker and artist? And perhaps you could just tell us a bit through how your journey of where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the catalyst was I met a band in 2014 called Sleaford Mods, and I interviewed them for a website. And I mean, I wasn't a filmmaker at the time. I just worked in an office at the time, in a studio in Brighton. And so I met this band, and they, I mean, for those that don't know their sort of stuff, they're kind of a band that are very, political. It's been described as kind of, like hip hop meets punk, which I think is a bit of it sounds like a good kind of term. I don't think it really does them justice, but a lot of the kind of music that they were making and the lyrics, I suppose, were exploring, the subject of people feeling, disenfranchised and marginalised and ignored. And the first thing I ever heard from them was a song called Tied Up in Knots, and the first line of that song is the smell of, can I say the word piss? Yeah, okay. The smell of piss is so strong it smells like decent bacon. And I just thought, wow, that's a great lyric. And I met them, and I was interviewing them for a music website, and they told me about this tour that they were going to do, which was kind of visiting places a bit off the beaten track, doing some cities, but also going to areas that bands don't often go to. And I sort of thought in my head at the time that would make a good idea for a documentary. And I'd never made a film. I'd never even picked up a camera, but the idea wouldn't go away. And 2 months later, it was still there. And I'd since sort of seen the band play live and hung out a bit with Jason, the singer, and this idea was still there. So I found someone to sort of co-direct with, Nathan Hanawin, and I mean, he was at film school, so he kind of knew how to make films. And we approached the band and pitched them this idea that it would follow them on this tour where they were going to these places where they were actively engaging with their audience. And we'd also, in going round to these places, kind of explore what was going on in those areas to, ask that age-old question, what's life like for you? And so, yeah, we just made this film. We crowdfunded the first bit of the budget, and then off we went, and it did all right. I mean, as I said, I had a full-time job, so I was kind of like balancing that. And at the end of my contract with this job, they didn't renew the contract because I think they knew that I'd kind of been making this film in my downtime. And so I was out of a job, but I suddenly sort of thought, well, what am I going to do now? And my wife says to me, well, why don't you become a filmmaker? And I said, well, look, you don't just become a filmmaker. You have to go to film school and all these other things. You can't just walk into it. And she said, well, you kind of have. And because the film had done all right, it'd been in cinemas and stuff, I sort of had a new career and just ended up there really. And I've been interested in politics and social issues, and my work sort of took that route really.
That's really interesting. So that's really quite late in life that you not became an artist, but it sort of morphed into that way of life. Would you say there's always been the seeds there? Like you said, you've obviously interested in social justice, politics, society. As a young man growing up, would you say that there was something there then as well that that attracted you to the arts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was young, I mean, like a lot of people, I was into music and I was into bands, and they never really went anywhere, but it was there. And I started, as many people do, started and never finished writing a novel, and always kind of had creative urges, but just wasn't good enough for any of the things that I attempted. So that was kind of always there. But I mean, I was probably, how old was I? I was about 38 when I first sort of started making this film, and I'd kind of given up on ever you know, going out there and doing anything, you know, in the arts, and it just sort of came along really. So it was, I suppose it was fortunate, and it was a surprise, but something that I welcomed. And I think, you know, I wasn't interested in sort of like, you know, making that film and then, you know, trying to get into making, you know, feature films or anything like that. I wanted to make documentary, and it's a place that you know, I'm quite happy in.
Yes, yeah, okay. Another question asking, I guess, you know, if there was a film or a play or a painting or a song that, in a way, particularly perceived, it doesn't have to be when you're young, but something that sort of, I don't say saved you, but made you feel less alone, something that gave you a, I don't know, a shelter perhaps, or something. I don't know. Anything comes to mind along your journey? Anything, a piece?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And it needs some thought. I mean, to just sort of come up with a few things just off the top of my head, things that I've always kind of gone back to. With Nal and I, that's something that, you know, from when I first saw that, which would have been in the 90s, early 90s, that's something I've always gone back to. Patrick Keeler's work, the Robinson trilogy, so London, Robinson in Space, Robinson in Ruins. I always go back to that. The Sex Pistols, you know, obviously Never Mind the Bollocks, but also that great documentary by Julian Temple, The Filth and the Fury. And then, like several kind of books, I suppose, always go back to really obvious ones, though, like Catcher in the Rye, which is a thing that a lot of blokes kind of go back to, isn't it? Very often, I know, but it's one that I try and reread quite often. And then one obscure one, which is a collection of short stories by a writer called Christopher Kenworthy, and it's called Will You Hold Me? And I read it in 1997. I won it in a competition when I was a student through Time Out. I won all these books, and one of them was this really great collection of short stories called Will You Hold Me? And Christopher Kenworthy went on to write a couple of novels, and he's also a filmmaker, and I think he's sort of written a few books about teaching film. But that book always really stayed with me because it had these wonderful titles. I remember one of the titles was The Mathematics of the Night, and I was just, it's really, I've always been inspired by titles as well, and it's really, I don't know, I mean, I'm surprised that he never wrote more books. Don't know why he didn't, but that's just more obscure one, I suppose, and I still read it from time to time.
That's interesting. Okay, thank you. Which takes me lovely to our next question, really. Can arts help with our mental health?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, especially now with what we're experiencing with COVID-19 and being in lockdown, I think, you know, when you can't go out into the world as much and you can't interact with other people, then, you know, you escape into art and you escape into books, into films and music. I mean, I think some of the things that have come out of this have been wonderful. Seeing what Tim Burgess is doing on Twitter with the listen along things.
Yeah,
I think that's great. I mean, that's a communal experience that, you know, as long as you've got a phone and a signal or a laptop and a signal, you can join in, and you can stream the albums. But yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, I've tried to sort of you know, try to sort of, you know, watch more films and read more because there's obviously more time. I think there's obviously a lot of pressure if you are someone that's creative, there maybe is a bit of pressure to feel that you should be creating now, and I understand that. And for the first, you know, few weeks, I didn't do anything. I was just kind of like a lot of people, just a bit sort of numbed by it all, and I'd been sick for a while. But yeah, I think it's now more than ever we're kind of appreciating this sort of thing, and I think obviously now going into this next phase of it, it's going to be even harder because there's going to be less funding. There's going to be fewer opportunities. But I don't know, I mean, I've never had any public funding. I've always either sort of crowdfunded my stuff or kind of made it cheaply. And I mean, the one thing I'd always say is you do need some money to make something. You need money to live on. But I think sometimes when you kind of wait for permission, you wait for funding from arts bodies, and you don't always get it. So I mean, my kind of mantra is don't wait for permission, just make it differently, you know, borrow equipment or, you know, make a shorter version of it or whatever. And it's going to be tougher now, for sure.
Definitely, I think, which does put a lot of pressure on, you know, on everyone's life, you know, lives, but especially I think talking to, you know, writers, freelance artists, actors, directors, you know, it seems because a lot of their work was in that public domain, which has obviously been cut and amputated. It's almost like a bit of a recalibrating of almost identities as well, isn't it? Which can be healthy in one way, but I think it can also put people into a corner perhaps as well. And so, you know, so the creation perhaps, it's a painful way to live sometimes, isn't it? And I think if you look at great artists, probably people we've admired, from Van Gogh, Mark Rothko, etc., you know, mental health and depression and you know, suicide is always hovering around with, I think, with a lot of artists. So it's, to me, it's like a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's like you create because you have to, but sometimes it takes its toll, perhaps, that journey. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, if your work explores, you know, as mine does, you know, social issues, and you obviously meet a lot of people that are going through tough times, and experiencing all sorts of things, you know, sometimes very traumatic. And I think one of the things I've struggled with a bit is that kind of guilt that you feel that, I mean, I have, you know, I don't like the term career because it's just the wrong sort of term. But I suppose I have a creative life because of the things that I've made, that have, you know, the 2 features that I've made and other things I've worked on, which are about people that have experienced, you know, tough times and misery. And sometimes I've sort of thought, you know, have I profited from that? And if you're being very, you know, black and white and stark about it, in a way I have, and I do struggle with that because it sort of feels a bit, you know, not disingenuous, but I just feel a bit kind of, it feels a bit off sometimes. I think, you know, you have to approach it for the right reasons. And the reasons I always wanted to do it was to kind of, you know, amplify voices rather than, you know, just point a camera and, you know, observe something, but to also engage the people in the process and, you know, tell the stories with them, rather than sort of saying, right, I'm going to tell your story for you, but to, you know, make something with people.
Yeah, because I'm going to ask you about that, because particularly I was really affected by Dispossession. I thought it's a really, you know, it took you into people's lives, and you were looking at that societal level, and then how it manifests itself in everyday life, and, you know, the sort of pressure people were under to survive, and that's interesting. But I suppose in a way, that by that film, like you said, it bore witness to this situation, so people would watch it and be shocked by it and challenged, perhaps, felt their stories are being told. So I suppose the question leading on to that, for me, is about how the, you know, austerity in a way, and all these elements that the government have been pushing. And do you think that has had an adverse effect on, you know, people's mental health, from housing to work to those sort of benefit cuts, etc.? Did you see that when you were making the film and in life? You know?
Yeah, I mean, massively. I mean, I was, you know, when I made my first 2 films, I was living in Brighton, and I was, you know, traveling around. You know, we went all over England, to little, you know, not too much in Scotland where I live now, but, you know, we went to Glasgow, but around, you know, particularly with the first film, you know, some of the places we were visiting were places where there was, you know, deindustrialized communities, places that some of them, you know, would later be known as, in the media, as like those Brexit heartlands. And, you know, back in early 2015, we were seeing and we were meeting people. Originally, we were going to have a section in that Invisible Britain film about the EU referendum, because it was, you know, we knew that it was coming up, and we were asking people, and we did when we met people, because as well as, you know, following the band, we were meeting people in each town and city. And one of the questions was, you know, what's your view on Brexit? How are you going to vote? And I've still got all that footage, and it would make a fascinating little short. I mean, we never included it because we, you know, in the film we're exploring austerity, and we're looking at deindustrialization and former mining communities, and we're looking at the band, and it felt to sort of also put in, you know, Brexit and, you know, what was going to happen, because the film was also shot in the run up to the 2015 elections. So you had that too, and it just felt it was a little bit too much.
Yeah.
But certainly, you know, in going to those places and realizing that, you know, because of austerity, people were, in some places, had been manipulated to blame, you know, immigrants for their problems. You know, oh, I can't get an appointment on the NHS. Oh, that's because, you know, we have a problem with immigration, they've been told. And sometimes they believe that. And obviously that was one of the drivers for the Brexit, but it wasn't the only one, because it was, as say Danny Dorling's research has shown, it was I think a 53% middle class vote in the South as well that pushed it through. So I think just blaming white working class people in these areas is wrong. But what we were really seeing was the effect on communities of decades of neglect and being ignored had caused massive problems to do with mental health and to do with physical health as well, because in these places people had felt they'd been forgotten, and that's why they have kind of sort of moved away from thinking that mainstream politics works. They just have very little faith in it, and I'm inclined in a lot of respects to agree with some of them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's like I said, that Dispossession, it was a really affecting piece of work, really, and the stories and things that I found out that one thinks of housing associations as almost like these great charities doing great, but there's a lot of things going on behind, which the documentary showed that which impinged on people's lives immensely. And and I think coming out of this as well, I think mental health is going to be a huge crisis, I think, because for the amount of access that will be needed for people to talk about these things, and from frontline workers to just people stuck in their home, perhaps shielding, is a huge gamut of struggles I think we're all facing. And then when we come out of this, it's almost like the floodgates, perhaps. It worries me, I suppose. Can the infrastructure cope with it as well? So it's and I don't I sometimes question, as you said, our own artistic, because I do a lot of writing workshops in different in mental health units, nursing homes, care homes, etc. And I sometimes think, is it what people cannot help at all? But each day I always think I think it can ultimately. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing what we do. But I'm also quite reticent to call it a therapy sometimes. I don't know. I see myself as a writer who with words can be therapeutic, but I never go in saying I'm a therapist, sort of thing. Anyway, so I've gone off the subject here, Paul.
No, I know what you mean, because what you do is therapeutic, but I'd see why you wouldn't say you wouldn't go and say I'm a therapist, but it's therapeutic for people. people need to escape into it, but then I think they need to use it, and a lot of people that aren't already doing it wouldn't dream of saying that they were a writer or an artist, but the work that you do in going into them and bringing it out of them, because it's in there a lot of the time, and you're kind of drawing it out. So it is very therapeutic, definitely. I
think so, and yes, ultimately. And I was thinking then, as we were talking about how, in a way, this period where we see so much communication like this on the news and documentaries, and I was thinking, or question, do you think that in a way has made it more democratic, when we've heard more voices, perhaps more diverse voices coming through because of this sort of technique or this new way of sharing? Or do you feel it's the same old people popping up like Claire Fox on Sky News every now and again? Sorry, I shouldn't. She just gets me down here. But what do you think about this way of communicating as a filmmaker? Because I suppose medium is this visual. Are you happy with it? Do you watch a lot of the box?
I don't seek it out, but when you're watching the news at the moment, it's there, isn't it? It's the way that we're doing it. As a filmmaker, I sit there and think, like, some people, when they sort of shoot in their room, and you just think, like, my God, like, why don't you sort of arrange the place a bit differently, or you think, like, why don't you put a lamp on and light yourself, and you come out really
whiteboard.
But I sort of see there's a big thing, isn't there, about bookshelves and things like that. It's quite interesting to see some of the people, what they've got. I can't remember who it was, but it was some right-wing figure, and they just had all of, like, I think they had every horrible right-wing book except Mein Kampf. They probably had the sense to remove that one. But it is, what I like about it is it is democratizing, in that it would enable anybody to kind of get on TV. I think that's what's good about it. I think it's about, and it's not really curation, but it's, as long as there is the opportunity for all sorts of people to have their say, then I think it's a good thing. But if we're just going to have the same old voices, and then it's something that I think does need to be challenged. And I think television as a medium isn't, I mean, compared to say publishing, maybe it's a bit more inclusive, because I think publishing does tend to be, very, not necessarily very male, but just very middle class and white. Whereas I think in TV, it's in terms of, people that are behind the camera, but it definitely is. But in front of the camera, I think you do get a bit more of an inclusive thing going on. But yeah, I mean, when it goes, I mean, I don't want to say when it goes back to normal, because I don't think things should go back to normal. But when, in terms of TV and stuff, and we don't have to rely on Zoom, it's going to be interesting to see whether that kind of diversity of voices will still be there,
That's a good point, actually, yeah. Definitely, yeah. And it's funny, you pick up little things of people I've never heard of, like, some academics you find are speaking, university lecturers, and suddenly you Google them and you find their books, and it's like, oh, that's quite interesting, that person is. I've done a lot of that, really, it's quite, yeah, so will it carry on? Yeah, otherwise we'll just have Nicholas Witchell forever stuck on our screens.
Is he still going?
Somewhere along the line, yeah. I think he is, maybe. Yeah, he's been a bit quiet this time.
Yeah.
What's my next question? Okay. Oh, yeah. I suppose, do you have any coping strategies, I suppose, when perhaps, you do struggle a bit with, life or whatever, any ways out of perhaps the struggles, mental health wise, or, feeling as a filmmaker, it's a battle,
yeah,
a few ways you get through things.
I mean, for me, I'm lucky. I live in Edinburgh, and I live on Edinburgh's coast. So when I wake up in the morning, I've got a dog, and I walk him along the beach usually. I mean, we haven't been down there as much lately because he's a bit old and he's a bit frail and that. But walking him on the beach, or even if I just go for a bike ride around where I live, it's it's in the city, but it's kind of by the beach, and there's a lot of green space, and so either walking him on that beach, I mean, you can wake up and sometimes I might be a little down or feeling a bit kind of blue, but you walk along the sand, and even, if it's a kind of overcast day, you've got that sort of wide expanse and the sea. I mean, you can only really see Fife. It's not like you can see just for miles and miles.
America. No.
But it does kind of make you, or it makes me anyway, sort of just aware of the possibilities of things, I don't know, hopefully improving. So that, and I've started riding my bike. I mean, I bought a bike like last year, second-hand bike, and I didn't ride it for ages just because I didn't really sort of get into it. But then since this all started, I've been sort of trying to ride quite a lot and listening to a lot of music. I've been trying to sort of like listen to like an album every day, like not so much new stuff, but just kind of old things that I've not listened to in a while. And it was really sunny up here, like it was a rare sunny day, and I went for a ride and I listened to Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On," and the sun was sort of streaming through the kind of trees, and it was just one of those sort of beautiful moments that I think we really take for granted, or me personally, I've not had space to go and do that sort of thing, and it was wonderful.
That's interesting, because things you're talking about are quite simple. They're quite very cheap to do. They're very and very simple. Yeah, but I agree. A lot of people I've talked to have found, nature, as you said, the beach, forest, trees, flowers, birds, really simple. I almost feel a bit cliche talking about it, but I think that the immense power that they have over us to just, there's something magical in their mundaneness, perhaps, that lifts us. I definitely, I can see what you mean, and that physical act of cycling and getting the body and the blood going, again, very simple. And do you think that after this, I know we talked about the mental health crisis, sort of, which could be, do you think it's time to reevaluate perhaps mental health structures in Britain and perhaps how we deal with these issues?
Definitely. I think in this country we do have a mental health epidemic, and we have. I think I read a statistic the other day that it was 50% of young people in that kind of 16 to 24 year bracket suffering from mental health problems. And, if we've got a mental health epidemic in this country and we've got huge unemployment, which is going to go up by 9-10%, it's a no-brainer for me to think, well, why don't we invest in mental health practitioners, training people, There's probably going to be a lot of space on the high streets from shops that close
Yeah.
down. Why don't we have, centres where people can walk in and,
Yeah.
obviously you need to think about how this is going to work, because it's a very private thing to just go and talk to someone.
Yeah.
But you can design space so that you can have booths, and, we have like the Samaritans who do, good work where people can ring up, but sometimes maybe people just need someone in person. And, I'm not religious, and if you're not religious and you don't have that means of going to see somebody in your religious community, maybe something like that. I don't know. It sounds fanciful, and we're not going to get it under this government, I don't think. But it's something that's going to generate jobs and is going to would address mental health.
Definitely.
But who knows?
Yeah, but you're right. Again, it's fanciful and yet quite simple as well. It's just about a little bit of infrastructure and liaising with GPs, etc., to join up the dots, perhaps. Definitely. Okay, and then I suppose, but last question would be, what would be your advice to others if they're filmmakers, writers, creative people, really? Because, like I said, you started late in life, so that's got a different sort of journey to others. And what's your advice to someone wanting to create something?
My advice, whatever age you are, it's never too late. You can be in your 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever. If you've got an idea, if you've got the drive to make it, then go for it. And I think the other advice I've got, particularly if you're a filmmaker or somebody, a musician, is to not obsess over not having what people would maybe call the right equipment. I mean, if you're a filmmaker and you've got a smartphone, you can make a film on your phone. If you're a writer, obviously, you just need either, like a computer, or you need a pencil or a pen. But if you're somebody that does need material to actually make something, I think try to not obsess about having what the best equipment, or because it's about ideas, isn't it? Creativity is about ideas, originality usually, and that kind of perseverance to just get on with it. So I'd say don't wait for permission. I always, when I was younger, kind of waited for too long. I didn't go to film school because I didn't have the money, and what I should have done was just saved up all my pocket money and my money at Christmas and birthdays and bought a cheap little video camera. But I was put off. I was like, oh, it's not for me. And I really wish that, back then I'd have got into it earlier and, started 20 years earlier or whatever. So my main advice is to just don't think about the barriers, think about how you kind of get under those barriers or get over them.
That's great. Thank you. I like that about permission as well, because sometimes we feel, I remember growing up, in the valleys, as wanting to be a writer, and people thought I was crazy. People thought it was just for rich people or people who went to Oxford and Cambridge, and I'm not that old, as in it wasn't that long ago, really. I remember thinking because it was a working class, environment I came from, people just thought it was just the craziest thing. And it was always, you do have to have that strength, almost like of an athlete, of just saying, no, bollocks, I'm going to do this, So that's a great message. Well, that's marvelous, Paul. Thank you very much. I hope it was all right, really. The questions,
No, I enjoyed it. It's really good. I've done a couple of these sort of things. It's easy when you know the person and when they're also like someone that's creative, because you can have a proper chat and go back and forth. So thank you for asking me.